Welcome into another edition of New Track Record Podcast from the WELT studios. Caleb Hatch and Justin Kinney with you. Bit of a slower news week in IndyCar compared to last week with Penske Entertainment buying Long Beach, but we do have more silly season news this week to run through and some interesting possibilities for IndyCar in 2025 and also a former IndyCar team owner connected to F1 in 2026. We'll have that a bit later on as well. But first, hello, Justin.
Hello, Caleb. How are you?
Doing well.
We got our first dose of winter weather here in Northeast Indiana the last couple days. Nothing crazy, but anytime it snows for the first time around here, people just love to make a big deal about it. And at least where I am, we got more snow than the Fort Wayne area did. Down in Huntington, we probably got an inch and a half, but of the white stuff. But we got the first one out the way. Now we can look ahead and see what the rest of the winter holds weather-wise.
Yes, and what's weird is normally we get snow before this time. Like, this is actually kind of late.
Right.
In terms of, like, it may snow, it may not stick. Like, last year on Halloween, it snowed, right? So it's kind of hard to believe it took this long. But we're very much in the throes of winter, and, you know, IndyCar also kind of in the throes of winter. They did have the thermal test, a few interesting items out of that. We'll get to that as well. But the headline this week, Ray Robb confirmed at Juncos Hollinger Racing for 2025 in a deal for that team. And this is the car number was not announced, right? So that's the key thing. Is it the 77? Is it the 78? I would guess it would be the 78 based on how they do things. But so they needed the money, as we know, and they have a driver who provides the money to make it work. And look, they bet big on themselves with Grosjean and with Canapino in terms of them being able to attract sponsors, and that just simply was not the case. Canapino had the falling out with the team. The Argentinian sponsors didn't necessarily come through. I'm sure the economic realities of that country at the time, and right. I know inflation is improving down there, but it's still a mess, contributed to the struggles there. But it did not work. They made a big bet. It did not pay off. So now they're going simply with a driver who brings a lot of funding to try to make it work and stay on the grid, because having those charters is pretty important.
It is pretty important, and I know there was a lot of discussion online about Ray Robb, and this is how motorsports has been forever, right? Guys that have more money are more likely to be on the grid than guys that don't, even if the guys that don't are better talents. We know what Ray Robb is. We know what Ray Robb isn't. But Juncos is in a position where it desperately needs money. And to me, and this is a greater conversation about Juncos as a whole, is where are we at with this team? You know, after bumping Fernando Alonso out of the Indianapolis 500, you felt, okay, this was finally going to be the catalyst where Juncos was really going to get some investment and some advertising, and they were going to take off from there, and it didn't happen. And then they really become chummy with Argentina, and you feel, okay, with Agustin Canapino in a seat, this is really going to start bringing in some big-time money and funding, and it didn't. And we're kind of at a point where we're like, where is this team going? It's obviously not capitalized on opportunities that it's had to bring in some big investors, some big sponsors. So what are we kind of doing with this team? I like Ricardo Juncos. I like him on the grid, but when you look at what other teams could potentially bring, a Prima, a Pratt Miller, an Abel, I mean, would it be the worst thing if Juncos was gone in a couple of years? I mean, if you're having to put Ray Robb and another paying driver in a seat, even if it's Connor Daly, I just don't know what this team is going to do long term.
And you mentioned Connor Daly, and Marshall Pruitt had a silly season update earlier before this announcement came through, and he said basically things were leading towards Ray Robb potentially getting a seat, being in the 78, and that's what we think is going to happen, that he will be in the 78. Connor Daly could be the other driver pairing here, which if he can find the sponsorship, which is obviously going to be a lot less needed because of the money that Stingray Robb brings to the table, then that's, I guess, a good lineup, but that's still not as good as Romain Grosjean and Connor Daly, which they had at the end of last season.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, Grosjean's a better talent than both of them, and you seemingly can't afford Romain Grosjean. And Jenna Fryer was a bit combative in her comments on social media, but her point remains is Romain Grosjean, whether you love him or hate him, is still one of the more popular drivers on the grid, and you don't have enough money to hire him, even after bringing in Stingray Robb. If you don't have that, then what are you doing? And we're in a position where A, we have a full grid, and B, we have other teams that, in my opinion, are more deserving to be on the grid with charters than Juncos right now. And it just seems like the opportunities have passed Juncos by to be a competitive, growing team in this series. And unfortunately, fortunately, we're in a point where it's kind of like, what are we doing in this series if you're putting Stingray Robb out there and not bringing back Romain Grosjean? I know people will like Connor Daly on the grid. That's fun and all, but I don't think he's as good of a driver as Romain Grosjean, and he definitely isn't as popular as Romain Grosjean, whether you like him or hate him. And that's my thing with Juncos. And I've always been of the opinion, if you're not bringing, and I've said this about Coyne in the past too, if you're not bringing value to the grid, then get off the grid. And that's kind of where I'm at with Juncos right now.
You alluded to Jenna Fryer's comments. So she tweeted that Juncos hired Stingray Robb despite not having budget secure for Romain Grosjean. I'm going to get hate for this, but please explain to me how this hire is qualified to be on the grid over a lot of drivers who don't bring money. She adds, 3 years ago, another driver referred to Romain Grosjean as IndyCar's greatest marketing asset. Now he can't get a seat over ride buyers, and team he delivered for can't find a single sponsor for him. Let's cash that big Stingray check and hope it's not all spent on crash damage. Here's the thing. So yes, we're going to have drivers who bring budgets. That's the reality. And what I didn't realize and completely forgot about, Stingray Robb actually was a solid junior driver.
He was.
Coming up the ladder.
Yeah.
He raced in Pro Mazda / Indy Pro 2000. He was in that series for 4 seasons, did win it in 2020 with Juncos. He was also with Juncos in 2019. Then he was in Indy Lights for 2 seasons. Juncos the first year, finished 8th, and then he was with Andretti in 2022. Won, 3 races, had a couple other podiums, finished 2nd in the championship. So, I mean, he was accomplished on the ladder. Like, I think it's easy to forget that. Now, in IndyCar, it's been a struggle. He was with Coyne in 23, 23rd. Last year, 20th with Voigt. Did have his first top 10 and 9th at Gateway. Did lead laps at the Indy 500, finished 16th. And there was improvement the second half of the season. But the reality is, yes, the results have not been there. But I think it's easy to paint him as a quote-unquote ride buyer when I completely forgot about his junior results. His results warranted him getting a seat. Like, I don't think anyone's going to deny that, right?
Yeah.
Coming into IndyCar, he just has not really progressed much since coming into the series.
Right. Go ahead.
Oh, and the other thing, she talks about the marketing aspect. So Grosjean, a week or two ago, had spoken about how, the series doesn't market and, he wasn't really getting paid to drive. He had to bring his own sponsors to the team. What's the commercial division of Juncos Hollinger Racing doing to attract sponsors? Because that, to me, seems to be the biggest issue. For teams that aren't attracting sponsors, well, do you have a team that's going out and selling your team, basically, to get sponsors to talk about the value? Look, IndyCar has all 17 races on network TV in 2025. You can't tell me you can't sell that.
You still can't sell it. And I mean, that's another thing when I mentioned different high points for Juncos is when you brought on Brad Hollinger. And that was going to be, okay, this is a partner that's going to bring in more capital to the team. And we're going to be able to do this, that, and the other. And that didn't happen. And one exception that I'll take with Jenna Fryer's comments is the fact that Romain Grosjean came in and delivered for the team. He was 17th in points. The year before, Callum Ilott was 16th in points for Juncos. So let's not pretend that Romain Grosjean came in and just like had a
he didn't set the world on fire.
Yeah, he didn't have a Ferrucci-esque year for a team that's been down. But the fact of the matter is, Callum Ilott delivered for the team for multiple seasons, and you couldn't retain him. And then Romain Grosjean, I think, maximized the potential of this team, much like Ilott did, and he wasn't retained. So what are we doing here? I mean, I think two guys that finished 16th and 17th in points over the last 2 years deserve to stay with the team, and neither one of them is because the team has no money.
And again, when Brad Hollinger came in, he came on leaving Williams, right?
Yeah, it was a Williams shareholder.
And came over to Juncos and IndyCar, said, okay, I'm going to invest in this, and I think there's value. And we know going into 2023, there was a lot of chatter early in the season like, whoa, Juncos has a setup. You know, they had the hospitality set up in the paddock. They were no longer the small, little, underfunded team. They were on par with the midfield
supposedly.
teams.
I mean, maybe they were throwing a lot of money around early, but in the back end still don't have anything.
But here we are, and, you know, they have one pay driver, and then are they going to have a paid driver on the other? I mean, I would guess Connor Daly's as good of a bet unless someone else comes available that they feel good about the talent level and bring a lot of funding. But I mean, Connor Daly's a solid choice. He's a journeyman IndyCar driver, but he is what he is. He's good. Is he going to win you races? No. Could he get you an occasional podium? Yes. He's a solid driver, but he's a midfield driver. Stingray Robb, we know, is going to be toward the back of the grid. Unless he makes a big jump forward. And I don't see that based on the jump we saw Foyt make last year. And while he had flashes, he was never really in the picture, so to speak.
Well, I think another factor is something that was in the mailbag this week and was talking about Able Motorsports.
Yes.
And its inability to get a engine lease because it was planning on starting out to be a one-car team as opposed to Prima, who is coming in with two cars. You look at how much Juncos is stretching itself to be two cars. Does it have to for an engine supplier, and right now that's Chevy, to agree to engine leases with them? Is this a team that is having to stretch to field two cars out of necessity to be able to stay on the grid? Because remember, this is only going to be the third year in which this team has had multiple cars on the grid. And you kind of look at the performance and say, maybe they'd be better off just having one car. With limited resources, limited funding, if they only have to put one car out there, it's a heck of a lot easier than having to put two. If they put one car out there and it's Romain Grosjean, I personally feel more confident in being able to have results than a two-car team of Stingray Robb and TBA. Let's say it's Connor Daly. But is the series and the OEM saying you have to have a multi-car team on the grid if you're full-time and forcing Juncos' hand?
Yeah, Marshall Pruitt, Racer.com mailbag said Bill Abel could buy Prima with pocket change, bought a new car before Prima had announced it was entering IndyCar, so I wouldn't position things in the way of one being wealthy and cavalier and the other being timid. He said nobody was willing to give Abel an engine lease for a single car entry, which is how the team wanted to start out, 2 or nothing. And then he adds, Chip Ganassi started with one car, same with Coyne, same with Mike Shank, same with Bobby Rahal. They've grown their teams. And then he concludes, I have nothing against Prema. It's the principle of not backing someone like Abel or Henry Malukas, HMD Motorsports, in favor of a new entity with no history of supporting the series over one who does today. If it is 2 or nothing, then I think that's a problem. Like with the OEMs. I understand they need numbers, but I think you can find the numbers even with single car teams because there are several other entities interested in coming to the grid. We know this.
Right, but then you have to look on why the OEMs would approach it that way. Is it because of cost? Is it be like we just...
Well, what else would it be?
Well, you're right. But it's like, but then that's an IndyCar problem, right? You're making it so expensive that OEMs are going to be like, we're not supporting a one car team. We don't make enough money. It's too much of a loss.
Well, and cost has been a factor. That's been discussed by all the team owners that, hey, the charters are going to help us. It can bring in outside investment. Basically seems to have saved Ed Carpenter Racing, right?
I mean, yeah, that's a huge infusion of money. It almost is reminiscent of Brad Hollinger in terms of the hype around it. Oh, this is going to take Ed Carpenter Racing to the next level. It didn't for Juncos, so let's see if it works for Ed Carpenter. But also, don't forget the rumors that we've heard that teams were sniffing around Juncos trying to buy their charters and effectively buy them out. And
well, remember the rumor late in the season, early in the offseason, was that Devlin DeFrancesco's dad was trying to essentially buy a stake in the Juncos team.
Correct.
And that has not happened as of now, and we'll have more on where DeFrancesco looks like he'll end up in a bit when we continue with silly season talk, but that's kind of the look. And I guess to me, the frustration in all of this is, like, we have teams on the sidelines who can't get in. We have
Correct.
25 charters for 27 full-time cars. I think this situation will correct itself in a year or two.
Right.
I just think that's the reality that we're dealing with, but we just have to deal with it right now.
Yeah, we do. And I think you also talk about the rumor that supposedly Prema asked what the price would be to buy the charters from Juncos, and Juncos gave them a ridiculous $25 million per charter or something. But in racing where there's smoke, there's fire more often than not. And that tells me that Juncos is at least listening to someone who approaches them about buying their charters. And that tells me that they're considering exiting the series. And then when you're looking at all the opportunities that Juncos has had over the last handful of years, since 2018 when they bumped Alonso? Was that 2018?
2019.
2019? They just haven't maximized those opportunities. And here we are still, let's be honest, being a filler on the grid. And when you have 27 full-time cars, we've talked about it before, if you take 2 cars away that aren't competitive anyway, you're not losing anything. And if it helps a Prema that at least right now is fully invested 2 paid drivers and immense infrastructure that they're putting in there, they've invested so much money and they don't even have charters, then it's almost like, make room for others. If you're not going to be able to be competitive, then make room for everybody, for other teams.
And maybe Prema's joining because they're making the bet that either Coyne or Juncos, because we know Carpenter is safe now with getting that investor, that one of those teams is going to fall off the grid. And maybe that's why they say, hey, we can ride this out for a year or two, knowing that we can fall in line.
Yeah.
In 2026 or 2027.
And I think that revolves around right now Juncos. I mean, Coyne is also in a dangerous position, but is openly looking for investors. But you already have an investor in Brad Allender for Juncos Hollinger, and it's still a backmarker team. I know a lot of people will get excited if Connor Daly's a full-time driver on the grid. I'm not one of them. Connor Daly's had a measurable number of opportunities. He is who he is. He's an exciting driver. I like him personality-wise, but he doesn't move the needle to me. And then you put him on Juncos, and he really doesn't move the needle for me.
He did get him a podium, though.
He did give them a podium. Another opportunity lost, right? Momentum at Iowa? Or no, he was a pole at Iowa somewhere.
Well, that was Carlin a couple years ago.
Right, wasn't with
no.
Where was he?
Connor Daly. Let's see. Was it Gateway?
Maybe Gateway. Just another lost opportunity. Hey, you have a driver finish on the podium. How about that? Let's get a couple big time sponsors. No, it didn't happen.
Well, I guess this is what it comes down to for me is when you have these smaller teams, and I understand they're not going to have the resources on the technical and engineering side that these bigger teams will have. That's fine. But everyone has the same opportunity to have people who can market and sell, and I get that the top teams are going to attract the top talent,
right.
But you should be able to sell sponsors for your team for a series that has all 17 races on network TV, all practice and qualifying on a well-established cable sports channel in Fox Sports 1 and Fox Sports 2. Like, this should be an easy sell to get sponsored. Now, are you going to get a $10 million budget? No. But you should be able to get enough budget to make this work. And whether that's you have a small budget and then the driver gets percentages of based on results, which is what a lot of teams do, that's fine. But I can't buy the fact that you can't sell this new TV package because it should be a game changer for these teams. And it feels like they're doing things the same way they've always done them, and that's why nothing's changing.
I mean, they couldn't even sell...
It was a third at Milwaukee, by the way.
They couldn't even sell Canapino on the grid to Argentinian companies. I mean, some, but it wasn't like you brought on a
He lasted a year and a half. And again, though, because those other countries, it is more based on, government, or as they have it, ministry of whatever, in those countries is more government support. They had, tourism, like a board, like Visit Argentina or whatever is on there. That's a little different. And also, I would think it's harder to sell sponsors of just normal products of Argentina in the U.S. because, you're not in the Argentina market. Like, you're not...
Right.
I understand, government funding, like, tourism agencies, things like that, which is what they had on board. But beyond that, I feel like it would be very difficult. And with the financial situation in Argentina, borderline impossible.
And I think how much was Ricardo Juncos banking on at this point in 2024, a event being on the schedule in Argentina?
Also true.
And thinking that would really buoy his team. I don't know, but we've been around for 5, 6 years now, 7 years. There's just no growth. I mean, you've gone from 1 car to 2, but you're still just you're a field filler, and it's sad to say, but you are.
And Pruitt's added at the end of his silly season story, it could be a ride-sharing deal for the other entry possible, or Connor Daly, who again is going to drum up sponsorship and find a way to at least get some races on the grid, but. Here's my thing. Ultimately, you got to be able to sell with this new TV deal. I struggle to believe that you can't drum up support.
I mean,
because
unless
of exposure.
Unless it's a year after you see the numbers, and then you can go back and sell it.
But in those meetings, you say, hey, look, here's our schedule.
Yeah,
our TV schedule. We have the best exposure we've ever had as a series in the U.S. That's a selling point. And I guess the other thing for me is, what's the long-term growth of this team? Is it just doing what they're doing this year and hanging on to the grid like we saw Coyne do last year, or are they trying to attract another investor because they have an investor and it's not working?
Yeah,
like that's the thing that's hard. Like they have that other investor and he's got to be going like, hey, what are we doing here? We should be able to go out and hire the best and attract sponsors, and that just simply has not worked.
And here we are, and it's not much as of a damning indictment on Stingray Robb. He is who he is. It's just more on Juncos in an era right now where we have crazy interest in being in the series, both with teams currently in the series and teams that can't get in the series. If you're not showing steady progress to be better, I don't know what you're doing.
And both entries made the leader circle. That's the other factor.
So you have that bump, $2 million. You have to think Brad Hollinger's throwing in $2 million at least. So do you have like no marketing budget or whatsoever after that? I don't know. It's I know it's upwards of $8 to $10 million per entry to run IndyCar in an IndyCar season now. But gosh, again, ride buyers have always been a thing. I don't know why Jenna Fryer is so incredulous on it, because it's always been a thing. But I think it's more of an indictment against Juncos and its direction or lack thereof, and its inability to take advantage of the opportunities it's been presented over the last 5 or 6 years to grow as a team, and it hasn't.
Yes. Moving on.
Okay.
Other silly season updates. So obviously there are 2 unconfirmed seats at Coyne. Marshall Pruitt saying that Coyne's still working hard to onboard a new co-owner or investor in the team, and it sounds promising that Todd Alt of BitNile, he's on pole position as far as being that owner investor. So that would tell me 2 things. One, they're going to have one really solid number 1 car like they did for a long time back in the day with Justin Wilson, Sebastian Bourdais, etc. That would probably be Rinus VeeKay, right? And then the other entry would kind of depend on what the funding is. They've tested several drivers. Toby Sowery tested for them at Thermal. Obviously, Hunter McElroy was around the team. Pietro Fittipaldi, this is interesting. We thought he was completely out for IndyCar. But his commitment to a full season IMSA LMP2 deal with Pratt Miller Motorsports, he'd only be forced to miss one IndyCar weekend due to a date conflict, according to Pruitt. So put that back on the radar. Enzo Fittipaldi as well. Jacob Abel, who we know would probably come with funding. And then several other drivers. I mean, we haven't even talked about Linus Lundqvist in a while. That's a name we always forget. That would be obviously a talent hire, as opposed to just funding. Jamie Chadwick, is she still on the radar for teams? Catherine Legg, put her name out there as well, since she was with the team last year. So that's interesting. They at least, if they can land Todd Ault, a Bitnile, which I thought he'd be gone forever from the sport,
right?
And that name after Portland, but if that gets Rinus VeeKay back on the grid, I think fans are happy.
It's definitely the best prospects that Ed Carpenter Racing has had for several years to have him on board. Now, how do they maximize that? And from what Marshall Pruitt said, it's one thing to get a driver, a capable driver like Rinus VeeKay back in the seat. It's another thing to have money to invest in sim time, in testing time, in off season, get on the shaker rig, all that stuff. That's an investments in the off season that pay off for the top teams that some teams just don't have the funding to do.
And Pruitt says it would be a lead driver for 25 and possibly hire both drivers starting in 2026, which would be massive.
That would be huge. That'd be huge. And then the money that comes in addition to that in terms of development in the off season. And yes, it's a spec series, but at the same time, if you don't have money to invest in things you can develop and testing and getting on the shaker rig and all that stuff, sim time is very expensive as well, then you're going to be behind the 8 ball. And that's where Ed Carpenter Racing has been for the better part of, what would you say, 10 years?
Yeah.
I mean, when did Fuzzies leave? Has it been 10 years? It hasn't been 10 years, right?
It hasn't been 10 years. They left in like 18 or so.
So, yeah, 7 years.
2019.
So this is as encouraging as it's been for Ed Carpenter Racing. You have to think since, you're partnered with Sarah Fisher.
I would say 2018, Ed Carpenter finished second in the Indy 500 and won the pole.
That's true.
And he was still with Fuzzies then.
Right. It still, though, wasn't a team that was competitive everywhere else. It had its heyday for sure with poles with Ed Carpenter Racing at the Indianapolis 500, but they can't even do that now. So we talk about teams that are stagnant and teams that are on an upward trajectory. Juncos, stagnant. Ed Carpenter Racing, at least right now, you feel upward trajectory. But we felt the same thing when Brad Hollinger came on board at Juncos, and that didn't turn out. So we'll see what happens with ECR.
Another thing to factor in that I just thought of, so it was end of 2018 that Fuzzies left ECR. Another factor with a change in presidential administration, normally with Republican presidents, that leads to increased spending for sponsorship, at least in motorsports, for the military agencies. So Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Army, Navy, that sort of thing. National Guard, like we've seen that in years past in IndyCar and NASCAR.
Right.
Does that happen in 2025? Now it's probably late in the ball game, so maybe it's like an Indy 500 deal or something like that.
True.
Or looking ahead to 2026, is that another factor of teams kind of fighting over that sponsorship money that's going to be new to the table, most likely in 2025 or 2026?
Yeah, it's something to keep an eye on and could definitely help out for sure.
Elsewhere in silly season stuff, Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan Racing, the 30 car, still open. Pruitt says Pietro Fittipaldi not out of the conversation at Ray Hall. Former Andretti driver Devlin DiFrancesco, rumored though as the replacement. They obviously lost Hy-Vee, so it really just comes down to what happens. And Pruitt had this interesting tidbit as well. With the new charter membership program, some of the folks attached to certain drivers are wanting to buy into those charters, and based on the bylaws, not every candidate meets the criteria.
Yeah, I didn't really understand what that meant. What's the criteria? Why can some buy in and some can't? I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know, so that's just another question to add to the table. And then we obviously had the thermal test, where we thought, hey, we might get something interesting out of it. Logan Sargent ran with Meyer Shank Racing. He finished third overall in the timesheets behind Felipe Nasser, who led the way, which, again, that's just kind of a favor for him running with Team Penske in their sports car program. But it doesn't sound like Sargent is bringing a budget. It sounds like he is there for hire, and that's about it. He showed himself well. There are 4 seats left. Pruitt says the odds of him landing on the IndyCar grid next season are remote. But he could be a stand-in if needed. So we'll see. But I just find that interesting that he's not really bringing anything, and my guess would be he won't be on the grid because of it.
No, but it sounded like the test went well, both for him, but also, did he test with MSR? Is that who he tested with?
Yes.
And based on what Marshall Pruitt had to say, MSR really took to him. It said, from one crew member, said we kind of expected this aloof F1 guy, and he came in and was warm and really talked and was very communicative inside the car and outside the car. So seemed like he endeared himself to MSR, and something like that, the experience like that, not only does it help with his chances in MSR, but that spreads around the paddock, right? And this guy was really approachable and wasn't a prima donna, blah, blah, blah. You wouldn't know that he came from F1 based on how he acts. And it sounded like Logan Sargent felt really good in terms of how welcoming the paddock was. And it's different than being in Formula One in terms of, friendliness and stuff like that. So maybe, like you said, maybe not for 25, for 26 though. I mean, Logan Sargent is still what?
23.
23?
Yeah. I was shocked that he was that young.
I mean, that's the thing. With some of these drivers that get in Formula One being so young is when they are cast out of Formula One. You think, well, they're done, but they're still so incredibly young. So I think Logan Sargent sounds like he made a good impression. The series made a good impression on him. And maybe it makes him want to maybe go out and drum up a couple $1 million for 2026, potentially.
And let's not forget that Chip Ganassi Racing could run a 4th entry for the Indy 500. Could he be in play there?
Yeah, that's kind of tough though for a guy that hasn't done ovals to say, okay, you're first.
It's more likely to be a Takuma Sato or some sort of veteran driver coming in as a one-off.
Yeah, that's what I think. And so I could see maybe Logan Sargent, maybe he's a late season replacement for somebody.
Yeah. And
gets a couple spot starts late in the season at a Laguna Seca, Portland, somewhere like that to really kind of acclimate himself and then go from there. But I would welcome Logan Sargent in. I mean, any driver that's good enough to make F1 is good enough for me to be on the grid. I don't get some people's really
the animosity.
The animosity with Formula One drivers coming over to compete in quote unquote our series. But this is a guy that got to where he was on merit, not necessarily money, because he doesn't have much of it now in terms of to bring a budget. And how much is to say that he was with Williams when it was bad too. And so I would welcome Logan Sargent into IndyCar in 2026, but it sounds like that's the earliest we could see him, unless we see him late in 25.
Couple of notes on Thermal Club itself. This from the Desert Sun. Pit road expanded. They can now fit 34 cars, so that's not going to be an issue for this. Also, as far as ticket sales, so obviously tickets on sale, they expect 5,000 to 7,000 fans, 6,000 to 7,000 fans for the event. I didn't know this. There's a 48-room hotel as well on the property. So
we've talked about Thermal. We talked about it last week. I have no problem with an intimate event like that, and I'm glad that it's
and it's not like there isn't an accessible event nearby, because they have Long Beach.
Exactly.
Like that. That's what I guess makes it okay for me, is you have an event that is an hour and a half away,
and based on
major IndyCar race.
And let's be real, based on who was paying to go to Phoenix, 5,000 should be more than enough for people in that area that want to go see an IndyCar race, right?
As far as the tests, you had Louis Foster with Ray Hall as well. I mentioned Felipe Nasser, Logan Sargent with Meyer Shank in the car. Let's see, who else did we have at the test? We had Toby Sowery with Dale Coyne Racing. Who was with Ed Carpenter Racing? I'm drawing a blank as far as who was there with ECR.
I cannot even remember who was in the seat for ECR.
Was it Hunter McElroy?
I think so.
I think so. So you had 6 drivers there.
I mean, Hunter
McElroy was there as well.
We never put any stock into testing times, particularly when you have different goals for different teams at the test, and that where we were with thermal. So yeah, P1's nice, P2's nice, but it doesn't really matter.
No. Felipe Nasser is not an IndyCar driver. He was P1. So there you have it. But that's a look at silly season news and what we had. Let's see. Oh, I forgot Enzo Fittipaldi with McLaren as well. So that was a look at the testing lineup at Thermal. But that's a look at silly season. If you agree or disagree with us, especially on the Juncos Stingray Robb stuff, please let us know. You can always interact with us. New Track Record Podcast at gmail.com is the email address. You can find us on social media, IndyCar Podcast on Instagram, also on Twitter/X, on Facebook. Just search for New Track Record. If you want to be on the email list so you don't miss new episodes or special announcements, just send us an email at that New Track Record Podcast at gmail.com and we'll get you on the list. Thanks to our Patreon members, patreon.com/New Track Record. Thanks to Xavier and others for their support. And as always, you can download and listen for free on your favorite podcasting platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, Overcast, CastBox, Player FM, wherever you find your podcasts. Okay, mailbag time and a few things to get to. And we didn't even get to this earlier, but I think we've seen some shocking news like behind the scenes, not just with driver lineups, but with management. Obviously, last week it was Michael Cannon leaving Foyt. Well, we have another one, and this week it is Gavin Ward out at McLaren. So he is no longer in charge there.
If you had to speculate, and that's all we can do because we don't really have any concrete information on why is Gavin Ward out?
I think the team didn't make the jump that they expected in his 2 years. No Indy 500 wins, no championships. Pato Ward's still the only driver to win a race for the team.
They still struggled at Indy outside of Pato, particularly to make it in 23, right? With a couple drivers that were starting towards the back.
I don't.
Well, no. What it was earlier in the day they didn't have speed, and then they found it because I remember
they were fine. I mean, their lineup last year was solid.
Yeah,
Larson, Pato Ward. But Alexander Rossi, Callum Ilott.
But you had the issues, right, on qualifying day, if I remember, where you had who pulled out of line? Was it Rossi?
I think it was Ilott.
Was it Ilott that pulled out? But there was issues with McLaren. I have a terrible memory. There was issues with McLaren early on that day. And that's why I just remember seeing Gavin Ward looking frustrated and stuff, but I can't remember. I'm sure.
I think the reality is the team basically stayed where they were at. They didn't make the jump forward, and that's the issue.
I agree. Is 2 years enough to properly engage?
I mean, they're also moving race shops too.
True.
So there's a
start type thing.
Yeah. I mean, I would think Tony Kanaan potentially could take over this role. Look, we saw Taylor Kyle leave for Chip Ganassi Racing. Now Gavin Ward used to be Joseph Newgarden's engineer at Penske. Man, where does he go?
You think Tony Kanaan is going to be...
Between Tony Kanaan and Brian Barnhart, I mean, those are kind of the two top guys. Barnhart is the general manager who's reporting to Ward. So...
Unless they go outside and...
Yeah, it's an interesting move. No immediate team principal replacement per Jenna Fryer. But a few replies on this, because this was obviously a very surprising move. Mom2X2002 on Twitter said, "What in the silly season is going on?" Yes. And Lynn_IndyCar, the continued greatness of Zach Brown by creating an environment where team leaders leave for other jobs. This continues to show that Alex Palou made the right decision to stay the best team in the series. Chip Ganassi Racing drive for the three-peat. It is puzzling, but this team just does things differently. And that's fine, but it's just not the way that IndyCar typically operates.
It wants to be Ganassi and Penske.
Yes.
Desperately, obviously.
Yes.
Is it realistic for anyone in that position to make McLaren, Penske, and Ganassi?
They got to do a big change in how they set up their cars. because the understanding is it's Pato gets his car his way and everyone has to follow suit. That does not work.
That doesn't work. Yeah,
other teams don't do that.
Right.
In terms of top teams, I just think that's weird.
Was that Gavin Ward's edict where everybody races Pato's setup?
But it's seemingly been that way for a long time.
I just don't know who you can hire that pushes this team up to Penske and Ganassi. I mean, those teams have decades of investment into IndyCar to get where they are today. And it's not just drivers. It's not just personnel. It's just information, right? And they can go back and pull something from 1999 if they want to, for example, or stuff like that. It's just, I don't know if you can get, I do know you can't get to that level in what, 6 years? 7 years?
Yeah. I mean, you go to 2020 was really the first year.
So yeah, even less. I mean, 5 years. It's more than that. And I know McLaren is very, very impatient. And I also think that the success that you have found in Formula One with McLaren in a position where they could win their first manufacturers championship since, I want to say, early 90s, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
That puts pressure on your other series that you're in. It's like, hey, if we're doing it at the pinnacle of motorsport, then we damn well better be doing it in B, C, D, E. And they're not right now in IndyCar.
Yeah, and I guess there's a lot of pressure on that team to win now, to win an Indy 500, to win a championship, and they've been so close a couple of times. But they only have one championship contender on the team for one. Team Penske has 3.
Right.
Ganassi has two. Andretti has, what, 1, I guess?
Yeah.
1.5. I mean, they have 3 solid drivers, but
they have one that can
they have one that can win a championship currently. Maybe 2 in the future. We'll see. But yes, I mean, that's...
And don't you put some stock into the fact that Pato finished second to Joseph Newgarden at the 500?
Yeah.
Very easily could have won that. Let's say that goes enough different way and Pato holds off Joseph Newgarden late. I mean, Gavin Ward's still employed.
Probably.
So you're firing him based on one position in one race?
On a, turn 3 pass on the last lap.
Yeah, right? I just, okay.
But I guess the other thing is, though, where does Michael Cannon go? Where does Gavin Ward go? Those are, the new storylines.
I mean, is Michael Cannon available? Was the move made after Michael Cannon became available? Is Michael Cannon heading to McLaren and it couldn't be announced until Gavin Ward was officially gone? I mean, maybe that's a storyline to watch.
Elsewhere on the mailbag, this from Lynn_IndyCar. So we picked Rick Mears on our IndyCar Mount Rushmore over Dario Franchitti.
Mm-hmm.
And he went with the comparison. So Mears, 3 titles, 4 500s, 29 wins, 75 podiums, 40 poles. Franchitti, 4 championships, 3 in a row, 3 500s, 31 wins, 91 podiums, 34 poles. He says Dario seems to have the edge in stats to me. Different eras, though. And one of Dario's championships was the IRL pre-merger, pre-unification.
Yeah, my thing is the talent level and the field was much deeper.
Yes,
when Rick Mears wrote. I mean, just comparing stats is a simpleton's argument. You have to dig deeper than that.
I think Mears with the extra 500. Yes, he has 1 less championship, but they had more attrition with cars then too. So,
right.
I mean, in some ways you could say it's harder. In some ways you could say it's easier. I don't know. I still stand by Rick Mears. Bauer Racing. So we talked about the Rainy Lanier Bad Sport, Need for Weed. That's the name of it.
Uh-huh.
On Netflix. I said, watch this a few weeks ago. It's a good watch. Yes, I watched that a couple years ago. It's good.
It's a great
entertaining
name too, by the way.
Yes. Elsewhere. This from Kojo617. So we talked about Prema and their shop. They are not Downtown Speedway. That's PRI.
Okay.
They're across from Michael Andretti and Andretti Global.
Okay.
96th Street and Fishers, basically across the runway from the airport. He said, FYI, signage up at Prema on 96th Street and Fishers. Haven't seen any trucks or racing stuff pulling up yet. Signage went up last week, just a half mile from the Andretti shop. So they're neighbors. Forgot about that. We knew this. We forgot about it. So that is a look. I believe that is everything we have for the mailbag for this week. So we move on to news and notes, and not a whole lot of things, but enough to keep it interesting for this week. First off, Mark Miles, this is a good article from Project Dive Bomb, had this to say about a series of IndyCar announcements post Long Beach. He said, it's part of a series of announcements that we're working on that I think are going to be part of our rapid increase in our growth. So whatever that means, not sure. In terms of buying up other events, it kind of said it's a measured approach in terms of, if IndyCar is in that market of buying up, other tracks or things like that. It doesn't seem like it says there's an emphasis on IndyCar growing its existing events. Well, of course, working on a new car, which we know about. That's one of the other things. Obviously, they're going to modify the hybrid to better fit that car. In terms of events, Miles says they want to be opportunistic. So if it makes sense for us to invest in events, we'll do that. Long Beach, certainly a prime example of that.
If we say this is the first, or Mark Miles said this is the first of a series of announcements, and we know how Mark Miles likes to talk, so take it with a grain of salt. But let's say, for argument's sake, there's 3 more big announcements that he's including in this quote-unquote series of big announcements. What would those 3, or what will those 3 be in your mind? Predict.
Okay, so already this offseason we've had Grand Prix of Arlington. We've had Penske Entertainment buying Long Beach. Those are big things. Very big things. I would say they'll have more on the new car in terms of we'll see mock-ups or details on the new car. I think that's one. I think it'll be another street race announcement. Let's go with Denver. And then Mexico race, likely Mexico City. So there's 3. But that's
do we
my
think
3.
It's all race related?
Well, the new car's not race related.
Right, okay. So my 3 will be...
Mexico's one of them, right? I mean...
Yeah, you took my 3 probably.
Well, you can have the same ones.
I know. Well, I was thinking we'd have at least 2 different. But no, I think those are the same. I think Denver, Mexico City, new car. I think those are the 3. Do you think we get all 3 before St. Pete?
I think we get all 3 prior to the green flag of the Indy 500.
That's fair.
I don't think we'll get all 3 prior to St. Pete. I would be very surprised.
Do we get a demo next-gen car in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway?
I think we'll have a model. I don't think we'll have a demo.
Okay. Well, yeah, I don't think they're driving it, but do you think there's something sitting next to the pagoda that says, here's our next-gen car?
I think so.
Okay.
So, in terms of international expansion, which we love talking about on here, Miles had this to say, the target of IndyCar expanding outside the U.S. and Canada, outside North America. He said, we care a lot about the fan base. I think this is fascinating. He says this specifically, which I think is substantial in Latin America, from Mexico, Brazil, and elsewhere.
Okay.
We never stop looking for opportunities that make sense for us to pursue that. We've talked recently about our interest in exploring possibilities in Mexico City or in Mexico. That's top of mind, I promise you. Whether we can find a way to be racing more broadly in other places remains to be seen. He added this: we're not racing in Brazil or Argentina or other places in South America at the moment, but we haven't forgotten those fans. So it's on the radar.
All right. And I hope it's on the radar for in-season.
Yes, not exhibition.
Correct.
I agree. This was another really cool thing that Honda did. Unfortunately, it was not an IndyCar thing. It was a Honda thing. But Yuki Tsunoda, Liam Lawson, Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, who's the other driver? Or that's all of them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the Red Bull drivers in Formula One.
Correct.
They're in Vegas Grand Prix this weekend. But the other day they did a demo run, and Yuki Tsunoda ran an IndyCar, a Honda IndyCar with a sweet Honda Racing Company livery.
Yeah, it was nice.
Very cool.
Where'd they do it at?
So they did this in Vegas on the, I didn't know this, but Las Vegas Motor Speedway has a road course.
Okay, because I knew it was a road course, but I was wondering where the heck it was.
Yeah, I didn't know. So Max Verstappen drove the Acura AR606 GTP car and sports cars. Max said he definitely is interested in doing what? Like the Rolex? So
yeah,
that's pretty cool. Tsunoda said, if I have an opportunity, feel it's the right time, for sure I would love to. I like the U.S. itself, so I don't mind living here as well in terms of running the Indy 500 and kind of mirroring mirroring what Takuma Sato did. But a very cool crossover event. I wish we could see more of this. I wish IndyCar had more access to this. I get that it's a Honda event.
Yeah, it's more of a Honda F1 event.
I hope we get a really cool video to come out from this, which I haven't really seen anything like that.
Yeah, and Yuki Tsunoda said he'd be interested in running the 500 later in his career. You know, you never know about Max Verstappen. I think anytime you get one of, if not the best race car driver in the world at this time to be in a seat in an IndyCar, that's great.
And Scott Dixon and was there on site. First time, this from Joey Barnes, first day Verstappen and Dixon had ever met. So two of the greats in motorsports.
Two of the greats. And I think, too, it says something about Honda. Hopefully, it's a good sign for their long-term relationship in IndyCar if they're saying, hey, why don't you come jump in an IndyCar? We're an IndyCar. This will be fun. I would think if they're apathetic to the series, they'd be like, yeah, whatever. But I don't know. Maybe I'm looking too far into it. I'm probably looking for any sign that's a good sign from Honda.
I think
definitely was.
We all are.
Yes.
Canadian Grand Prix for F1, so this kind of related. Moving up on the calendar, it will take place third or fourth weekend of May, starting in 2026. It'll be after Miami. So could we have this
fourth weekend of May?
Yeah. Could we have this the same weekend as the Indy 500?
That we talked about this last week about potentially. Was it Miami or Canada, which will both be May? Well, it sounds like Miami's going to be early June, from what I read. But
no, Miami's early May.
Early May, okay.
And then Monaco's early June.
Okay,
that's what you're thinking of.
So Canada, yeah, could it be on the same weekend? I'd rather have Monaco. Because I just don't think F1 would do that because they'd be on at the same time, right?
I don't think so. I mean, the end of the article from Chris Medlin of Racers says, new date for Montreal, likely to create an even bigger month of May North American racing, Miami Canadian GPs taking place in the build-up to the Indy 500. I would be very surprised if they do it the same day. That just doesn't make sense. But that's me.
I hope not.
I hope not as well. So we'll keep an eye on that. And speaking of F1, one other note related to IndyCar. Now that Michael Andretti is out of the picture, momentum for the GM F1, GM Cadillac F1 entry seems to be picking up steam with F1 in Vegas. There's chatter that entry could be on the grid, could be the 11th team in 2026. Momentum builds for a GM Works entry. Now, the plan before was it would be a GM badged engine in 2028. And then they would have Renault power 2026, 2027 leading up to that. But with Michael Andretti no longer part of the picture at Andretti Global, there's seemingly more interest. Go figure.
I don't want to say that Michael Andretti was part of the problem, but it sounds like things have been easier without Michael Andretti in the picture, at least on the F1 side of things. I mentioned it to you before we started recording. You can't bully your way into Formula One.
No.
That doesn't work. And it felt like at times Michael Andretti was trying to bully his way into Formula One. Now with him seemingly out of the picture, and now it just seems like it's easier because just too many relationships were soured by Michael Andretti.
That he was the fall guy, basically. Now this is back on track, seemingly.
Yeah, whether it's warranted or not, it just seems that way.
It's, just a kind of a weird thing for it to suddenly be back in consideration. But
I could see even as simple as Michael Andretti telling everyone that would listen that F1 needs Andretti back in the series, and the F1 being, no, we don't.
Yeah.
And that turning everybody off.
Could be.
And now that Andretti's not around, now F1's open to it. But an 11th team would be huge for Formula One. I really can't care less that it's... I mean, I will. I guess there's a little bit of rooting interest if it's a GM team. I mean, I root for Haas. I like seeing Haas do well since it's owned by an American. So, but will it?
I feel no attachment to the Haas team.
Really?
No.
I do. I'd rather see them do well than not do well. But that's me. I liked them more when Gunther Steiner was in charge, but seemingly Gunther leaves and they have more success. Coincidence?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Outsized personality, but the results were not there toward the
definitely
end.
not there.
Speaking of Andretti, Colton Herta will be with the IMS Museum for an evening with their chat series Monday, December 2nd, 5:30 to 8. You can get the tickets at the IMS Museum website for that. Also, speaking of IMS, their end-of-season sale is coming up this Saturday. So we're recording this on Friday, November 22nd. So it is Saturday, November 23rd, back in person, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., the North Chalet, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Prices as low as 95 cents. A lot of merchandise there. It's a cashless event, so credit card only. They'll have food vendors there. Obviously, IMS signage available for purchase. And in addition to that, there will be some drivers on hand. Jack Miller, Indy Lights driver, will be on hand for an autograph session 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern. Then there will be, let's see, who else? Nolan Allar with Indy Lights as well, 11 to noon. And Ed Carpenter from noon to 1. And they'll have limited edition IndyCar trading cards as well as part of that. So
Sweet.
That's all for that event. Prima has announced their entries. The number 90 will be Callum Ilott, and Robert Schwartzman will be in the number 83. I believe that's tied to... One's tied to the year they started, and one is tied to their championships. Is that right?
Yeah, well, yes, their first championship.
They started in 1983.
Yep, and their first championship came...
In 1990?
Correct.
Okay, so that's the tie-in there. Elsewhere, just a couple other things. Meyershank Racing doing a promotion with the Columbus Blue Jackets of the NHL. A ticket package for the December 12th game. You can meet Elio Castroneves and Felix Rosenquist. Details on the Blue Jackets site, but it includes a meet and greet and a Q&A panel with the drivers. So that's cool cross-promotion. Obviously, Shank, a team from Ohio, so this checks out as well. And let's see, a few other quick things. Adam Alexander, you can rule him out for the IndyCar booth because he'll be with Prime Video's NASCAR booth for 2025. It'll be Adam Alexander, Dale Earnhardt Jr., and Steve Letarte. That would pretty good.
Yeah,
pretty good
solid
lineup there.
Trio there, and it hits all the notes. That's what I would like to see out of IndyCar's booth as well. You have a mainstay announcer, you have a former driver, you have a former crew chief. Engineer can give engineering insight. Can we get that with the IndyCar booth? I don't need 2 ex-drivers. I need somebody that's going to give some next level engineering intel, stuff like that.
And finding someone who can communicate, I think that's the challenge.
Yes.
Right, who can be good on TV.
Yes, and can tell us why certain things are being done and when. And we have that a little bit. We've talked about it ad nauseum, but I don't need 2 ex-drivers in the booth. They're repetitive in terms of their information. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully we get some news on that booth maybe before Christmas. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? 2 other notes. One, congrats to former IndyCar driver Dalton Kellett. His daughter, Sylvie Marilyn Kellett, was born on November 20th, so congrats to him. And Kiffin Simpson had this, talk about international races. He said, why IndyCar should race in the Cayman Islands. Off-season too long, hour and 45-minute flight from Miami, great weather, Stingray City, that's a real place, fun non-racing activities. We have Wendy's and Starbucks here. Thank you. I like it. I like the pitch.
Sure. I mean,
it would be like the Hawaiian Super Prix, but real.
Sure. Whether there is even a road course that can be put together at the Cayman Islands, who knows? But I mean, you got a Wendy's. What else do you need?
And a Starbucks. So, and great weather, which is also important. That would be a great race to run. As part of that exhibition series. Could that be a possibility?
You go. Yeah, go to the Caymans.
And IndyCar acknowledging something we have long wanted them to do. 100 days till the green flag officially today.
Holy moly.
At St. Pete. IndyCar tweeting that out. IndyCar on Fox tweeting that out. New account.
I'm going to have to follow that.
And NASCAR on Fox retweeting it. So
hey,
all in all, a
cross promotion on the same network. How about that?
but just thrilled. We've complained about this for years, and now we're seeing it.
We count down the Indy 500, 100 days to the 500, and they never do anything about 100 days till the start of the season. So, hey, the marketing for the for IndyCar on Fox is already batting 1,000.
And I got to correct myself. It was the Fox Sports account, not IndyCar on Fox, tweeting that, which is even better and bigger, obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
So, with that said, did we miss anything?
I don't think so. Once again, we have a packed show with not a lot of news out there. We somehow pull it off.
That is how we operate.
All right. Every week.
Time now for our random split era driver of the week.
All right. So we talk South American drivers, Brazil a lot, right? But how about Uruguay?
Ooh.
And going with Juan Caceres. His actual full name, Juan Ignacio Fufi Caceres Stewart. A Uruguayan former race car driver, did one race in the 2006 season for Coin at Road America. He finished 15th that season, or that race, for Coin, 2006. He had a Formula One test with Minardi in 2005. He also did some TC 2000 touring cars in Argentina. He actually started his racing career in go-karts and went over to Europe and raced in Formula BMW. He did the test session in Formula One at the Circuit de Catalunya in Spain, I believe that
yes.
is. And drove in Spanish Formula 3 and was never able to get up into even Formula 2 and did the test with Minardi. He remained in the Italian Formula 3000. He had a second place finish at both Spa and Silverstone in 2006. And that in September of that year is when he tested for Dale Coyne. And he impressed Coyne enough that he replaced Mario Dominguez in the Grand Prix of Road America in 2006, where he qualified and finished last. So you look at that finish of 15th and you go, hey, not bad.
Yeah.
Well, there were 15 cars in that event. So a far cry from 27 like we have full-time now in IndyCar. So that was it. That's where his Wikipedia even ends, is doing that race. So he is still with us, 40 years old, still a young dude, born in 1984, and did one race with Dale Coyne in 2006 in Champ Car, and that was it. One and done for Juan Ignacio Fufi Caceres Stewart, this week's Random Split Era Driver of the Week.
Just when I think we're running out of names, you find a name of a driver I've never heard of.
Just when you think we're coming to the end, like you said, a gem comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, we have plenty of material still. We've been doing this for how many years now? Like 3 years?
I think it's 3 years. I mean, my list is sizable on my phone. If I ever do get a new phone, I need to make sure I save this.
Because you make sure that we're not doing repeats anymore.
Correct. Absolutely. Yes. So, the gift that keeps on giving, Random Split Era Driver of the Week.
All right. Well, that does it for this week's episode. No episode next week due to the Thanksgiving holiday in the U.S. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. But for Justin Kinney, I am Caleb Hatch. Thanks, as always, for joining us on New Track Record Podcast.